A werewolf romance written by Moonbound Romance. Prologue. There is a sound that breaks the world open. It is not a roar. It is not a war cry. It is not the crack of thunder or the howl of a wolf splitting the night sky in two. It is silence. The kind of silence that comes after a person has screamed so long, so hard, so desperately, that their body simply gives up making sound. That was the silence that changed everything. That was the silence Leoric heard from half a mountain away, a silence so wrong, so unnatural, that every wolf instinct in his ancient blood stood up and screamed, "Something is dying." Not something. Someone. Her name was Thessaly, and the people who were supposed to protect her were the ones killing her. This is her story. And I was there for all of it, because I am her. Before we step into the story, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Are you hearing this under the midnight moon or in the quiet of the afternoon? Drop it in the comments. Now, let's dive in. Chapter 1. The Silence. The first lash took my voice, not immediately. No, the first one pulled a scream out of me so raw, so ragged, it scraped my throat on the way out like broken glass. I remember the sound of it bouncing off the stone walls of the packed courtyard. I remember how it echoed. I remember thinking, someone will hear this. Someone will come. No one came. The second lash took my breath. The third took my balance. By the fifth, I had stopped counting. By the eighth, I had stopped thinking in full sentences. My mind had broken itself down into single words, floating like debris in dark water. Cold. Stone. Blood. Stop. Please. They had stripped the back of my dress to the waist. The autumn air in Varenwood was sharp and bitter, carrying the smell of pine resin and wood smoke from the pack hall where everyone else sat eating their evening meal. Warm. Fed. Safe. And here I was, on my knees in the courtyard, wrists bound to the iron post that had stood in the center of our pack's gathering ground for 300 years. The post they called the Reckoning Stake. The post they only used for rogues, traitors, and criminals. I was none of those things. I was 22 years old. I was an Omega. I was the daughter of a dead woman who had once made the mistake of knowing too much, and I had made the mistake of being her daughter. That was my only crime. Count them, Lucre said. His voice was calm. That was the most terrifying thing about him. He never raised it. Not once in the 6 years I had lived under his pack's rule had I ever heard Alpha Lucre shout. He didn't need to. His calm was its own kind of violence, measured, deliberate, surgical. I heard Maldra's voice next, soft and sweet as poisoned honey. "That's 9, she said. "One more, and we've reached the pack law minimum for insubordination charges." She was smiling. I couldn't see her face, but I knew. I had memorized the sound of her smile years ago. It lived in her voice like a blade inside a velvet glove. "One more," Lucre agreed. I pressed my forehead against the iron post. The metal was ice cold against my skin. I focused on that cold. I tried to crawl inside it. I tried to make myself small enough to disappear into it. I heard the whistle of the leather strap cutting through the air, and then something inside me just stopped. Not my heart, not my lungs, but the part of me that screamed, the part that begged, the part that still believed somewhere beneath the pain and the blood and the cold that someone might hear me and come running. That part went quiet. The 10th lash landed. I felt it. I felt every terrible inch of it. But I made no sound. Not a gasp. Not a whimper. Not a single breath that wasn't perfectly, deliberately controlled. Silence. Complete and absolute silence. I heard Maldra shift uncomfortably behind me. I heard one of the guards, the younger one, the one who always looked at his boots when Lucre gave orders. I heard him step back. "She's passed out," someone muttered. "She hasn't," Lucre said. There was something new in his voice now, something that hadn't been there before. Not concern. Never concern. But something almost like unease. "She's still breathing." Should we? The guard started. Leave her, Lucre said. Until morning. Let her think about what it means to question my decisions in front of the pack. I heard their footsteps retreat across the stone. I heard the heavy wooden doors of the pack hall open and close. I heard laughter from inside, someone telling a joke, someone else banging a cup on a table. And then I was alone. The stars above Varenwood were very bright that night. I could see them if I tilted my head at a certain angle, pressed against the post the way I was. Cold and bright and impossibly far away. I counted them the way I used to count lashes. 1, 2, 3. Somewhere in the forest beyond the pack walls, a wolf howled. Not one of ours. The sound was different. Deeper. Older. It carried a frequency that I felt more in my chest than heard with my ears. It rolled through the trees like a slow wave of thunder, and for one strange, delirious moment, I felt it reach into the courtyard and wrap around me like a hand. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know in that moment that the howl came from a wolf who had been traveling for 3 days. A wolf who had stopped on the ridge above Varenwood because something in the wind had changed. Something wrong. Something that made the fur along his spine rise even in human form. I didn't know that Leoric, Alpha King of all 7 packs, lord of every territory from the Ashfin Mountains to the Coldwater coast, had heard my silence. That a silence could be louder than a scream. That a king could hear the exact moment a person stopped hoping. I only knew the stars, and the cold, and the slow, careful work of breathing without making a sound. Because if I made a sound, they would know I was still fighting. And the one thing I had left, the one thing Lucre had not taken from me, was the ability to fight in secret. My name is Thessaly. My mother died protecting a truth that could shatter this pack from the inside out. And tonight, on my knees in the cold, bleeding onto ancient stone, I decided I was going to find out what that truth was, even if it killed me. The doors of the pack hall were still warm with firelight, but somewhere above Varenwood, on a ridge smelling of pine and coming rain, a pair of gold eyes had gone very, very still. Chapter 2, Before the Blood. I was not always on my knees. There was a time, I have to remind myself of this, on the hard days, on the days when memory feels like a luxury I cannot afford. There was a time when I ran through these same forests, with my shoes off and my hair loose, and absolutely nothing in the world telling me I was lesser than anyone else. That time ended the night my mother died. Her name was Silwyn, and she was, without question, the most quietly powerful person I've ever known. Not powerful the way Lucre is powerful, not loud, not brutal, not built on the broken backs of people too afraid to fight back. Silwyn's power was different. It lived in her stillness, in the way she listened, in the way she seemed to know things before they were spoken, the way she moved through a room and left it calmer than she found it. She was the pack healer. Had been since before I was born. That role gave her access to everything. Every birth record. Every wound that came through her door in the dark hours. Every whispered confession from a pack member too ashamed to say their truth in daylight. She kept it all in a leather journal with a brass clasp that she wore on a cord around her neck even when she slept. I used to ask her why she never took it off. She would smile at me, that particular smile she had, the one that looked warm but had something careful behind it, and she would say, "Because some truths are too dangerous to leave unguarded, little bird." I was 16 when she died. They told everyone it was a fever, quick and brutal, the kind that takes the old and the weak, and sometimes, terribly, the ones in between. The pack healer dying of a fever, the irony was so thick you could choke on it, and I watched the faces in the crowd at her burial, and saw that not one of them questioned it. Not one of them looked at Lucre, and then looked away too fast. Not one of them noticed what I noticed. The journal was gone. She had worn it every day for as long as I could remember. She was buried without it. I was too young and too broken and too alone to know what to do with that information. So I did what grieving 16-year-olds do when they have no family left and no pack standing willing to take them in properly. I survived. I made myself small. I learned which floors in the pack hall creaked and which guards rotated shifts at what hour. I learned how to be invisible. I learned from Arya. She found me 3 days after Silwen's burial, sitting behind the woodpile at the edge of the pack grounds, eating the heel of a bread loaf I had found in the kitchen before anyone else was awake. I had not slept in 2 days. I probably looked like something the forest had chewed up and spat out. Arya sat down next to me without asking permission, and without saying a word for a full 5 minutes. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a piece of dried venison and set it on my knee. "You're Silwen's daughter," she said. "Yes." "I'm sorry about your mother." I didn't say anything. "My name is Arya. My father is one of the border guards. He's useless, but he has a warm fire, and he forgets I exist most of the time, which means I have the cottage mostly to myself." She paused. "You could sleep there tonight if you wanted. The floor is hard, but it doesn't have splinters." I looked at her for the first time. She was a year older than me. Dark eyes. A small scar on her chin from falling off a fence as a child, she told me later. She was looking back at me with an expression I had not seen on anyone's face in 3 days. She was not pitying me. She was simply offering. "Okay," I said. That was the beginning of the only friendship that has ever saved my life. Arya never asked me about the journal. She never pushed me to talk about my mother when I wasn't ready. But she watched. She noticed things. And in the years that followed, as Luker's hold on the pack tightened, and the mood in Varenwood grew heavier and stranger, it was Arya who kept me from disappearing entirely. She also kept me from doing something stupid on more than one occasion. Like the time, 4 years after Silwen's death, when I found the first clue. It was an accident. I was cleaning the upper storage room in the pack hall, one of the tasks assigned to Omegas that no one else wanted, when a loose floorboard shifted under my weight and revealed a small hollow beneath. Inside the hollow was a folded piece of paper. The handwriting on it was my mother's. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unfold it. The paper was old, edges soft with age, and the words on it were written in the shorthand code Silwen had used in her medical notes. A private cipher she had taught me as a child, turning it into a game. She thought it was a game, I remember thinking. She was already hiding things. I decoded it, standing right there, heart hammering, dust motes floating around me in the pale storage room light. It was a list of names, 7 of them. And next to each name, a date. And next to each date, a single word. 6 of the words were the same, silenced. The 7th name on the list was one I recognized immediately. It was my mother's name, Silwen. And next to it, a date that was 2 weeks in the future from when the note was written. And next to the date, a word that was different from all the others. Warned. She had known. She had known they were coming for her, and she had hidden this note, and somehow in the chaos of grief and fear and survival, I had not found it until now. I folded the paper with hands that had gone completely steady. I tucked it inside my shirt, against my skin. I finished cleaning the storage room, and that night, in Arya's cottage by the fire, I showed her what I had found, and we sat in silence for a very long time. "Thessaly," Arya said finally, "whatever this is, whatever your mother found out, Luker killed 6 people to keep it quiet. I know. And he would have killed her too, except she died before he could. Or she let him think she died," I said quietly. "Before he could." Arya stared at me. The fire crackled between us. And outside, the Varenwood forest pressed dark and close, and full of secrets against the cottage walls. Chapter 3. The Weight of Small Cruelties. Understanding that Lukar had murdered 6 people was one thing. Living inside his pack the next morning, setting his breakfast table, keeping your eyes down and your movements quiet and your face perfectly, carefully blank, that was another thing entirely. That was the thing that took all your strength. I had been doing it for 6 years by the time I found my mother's note. 6 years of learning the geometry of survival in a space ruled by a man who viewed people as pieces on a board. 6 years of absorbing small cruelties the way stone absorbs rain, quietly, without protest, letting them seep in and settle and become part of the landscape. Small cruelties are underestimated. People talk about the big ones, the beatings, the public punishments, the visible wounds. But it is the small ones that do the real damage. The ones that leave no marks. The way Lucar would look at me sometimes. Not with hatred. Hatred would have been honest, something I could hold on to and push back against. No, he looked at me with assessment. Like I was a variable in an equation he was still solving, a factor that had not yet been determined. The way Maldra would find reasons to reassign me to worse tasks whenever I had settled into a rhythm. Just as I had learned the schedule of the kitchen and carved out a small, predictable routine, she would appear with that soft smile and a new assignment. The waste pits, the animal pens in deepest winter, the outer fence repairs in rain. Not punishment. Never officially punishment. Just redirection. Because officially I had done nothing wrong. Officially I was a cooperative Omega doing her assigned work. Efficient, quiet, unremarkable. That was the armor I wore every day. Arya wore a different kind of armor. She had a brightness to her that seemed, on the surface, like simple warmth. She laughed easily. She talked to the guards like they were people. She brought food to the elderly pack members who couldn't always make it to the hall. Everyone liked Arya, and because everyone liked Arya, she moved through Varenwood's spaces more freely than almost anyone else at our rank. She used that freedom for me. It was Arya who told me which nights Lucar's private study was empty. Arya who noticed that Maldra kept a locked chest under the floorboards of the laundry room. Arya who befriended the oldest member of our pack, Orvin, the former record keeper, now so old he rarely left his cottage at the pack's eastern edge, and spent her off hours sitting with him, listening to his stories, because she understood the way I was slowly learning to understand that old people who have survived dangerous things carry the most important information in the world. Orvin was 81 years old. He had served 3 alphas before Lucar. He had a memory like river water, deep, clear, and carrying things from a long way upstream. He also, Arya told me one evening, had known my mother. He won't talk about her directly, Arya said. We were sitting in the small space between the woodpile and the pack hall's outer wall, a habit from years ago, a hiding spot we had never quite outgrown. But when I mention her name, he gets this look, like he's calculating something. What kind of look? The kind that means he knows more than he's saying, and he's trying to figure out if I can be trusted. I thought about that. Has he decided yet? I think he's deciding about you, Arya said. Not me. He's been asking questions about you, what you're like, whether you're careful. Something tightened in my chest. The careful hope of someone who has been waiting a long time. When can I meet him? I said. Soon, Arya said. But Thessaly, be careful. Lucar watches him too. Not closely, because Orvin seems like just a harmless old man. But he watches. Lucar watched everything. That was the nature of the man. He was not simply cruel. Cruelty on its own is inefficient, and Lucar was nothing if not efficient. He was strategic. Every action in Varenwood served a purpose in a larger design that only he could see in full. The public punishments were not about justice. They were demonstrations. They were messages. Which was why, when the incident happened 3 weeks after I found my mother's note, I understood immediately what it really was. It started over firewood. An Omega named Bren, older than me, quiet, with a bad knee from an old injury, had been assigned to split the winter firewood. It was heavy work for anyone. For a man with a bad knee in the first cold snaps of autumn, it was brutal. He worked the whole morning and filled the quota by midday, which by any measure was the task completed. Lucar said he had stacked it wrong. Not dangerously wrong. Not in any way that would cause a real problem. The angle was slightly off, which Lucar noted in front of the full-pack evening assembly, in that quiet, precise voice, as evidence of sloppiness. Evidence of an Omega who thought his work was good enough when in fact it fell short. Bren apologized, quietly, with his eyes down, the way we had all learned. Lucar accepted the apology the way a cat accepts the surrender of a mouse, with complete calm and zero mercy. Bren was assigned to restack the entire woodpile. That night, by himself, with his bad knee, in the dark. I watched from the kitchen window. Bren worked for 4 hours. I watched and I thought about my mother's list. 6 names. 6 people silenced. And the question I had been circling for weeks, like a wolf circling a fire, trying to get warm without getting burned. What did they all know? What truth is so dangerous that 6 people had to die for it? And more urgently, more personally, how long before Lucre decides I know too much? The answer came sooner than I expected. 10 days later, I was summoned to a pack assembly. The charge was insubordination. The evidence, a moment 2 weeks prior when I had, according to witnesses, questioned Lucre's decision to reduce the Omega food rations for the 3rd consecutive month. I had not questioned it loudly. I had not questioned it publicly. I had said quietly to Maldra in the kitchen that some of the older Omegas were already showing signs of nutrient deficiency, and perhaps a review of the medical standards. Maldra had smiled her velvet blade smile and said nothing. 2 weeks later at the assembly, she repeated my words back to me with surgical precision, and Lucre listened and assessed and calculated and reached his verdict. 10 lashes. Bound to the reckoning stake. As I was escorted out to the courtyard, I passed Arya in the doorway. She had gone the color of cold ash. Her hands were pressed flat against her sides, the way she held herself when she was trying not to do something that would get her hurt. I met her eyes. "Don't," I told her, without words. "Don't say anything. Don't move. Stay safe." She understood. She understood the way only Arya could, completely, and with a grief that she pressed down into her chest and held there so no one else could see it. I walked out to the courtyard. I knelt at the reckoning stake, and the stars came out above Varenwood, cold and bright and impossibly far away, and I thought about my mother's voice saying some truths are too dangerous to leave unguarded. I thought, I am still here. I am still breathing. And whatever you buried, Mama, I am going to find it. Then the first lash fell. Chapter 4. Gold Eyes in the Dark. He had not meant to stop at Varenwood. Leoric's route through the Eastern Territories was planned months in advance by Theron, his beta, who approached travel schedules with the same meticulous precision he brought to everything. Routes mapped, rest points identified, pack visits confirmed through official channels with appropriate advance notice. Varenwood was not on the route. Leoric had deviated from it on the 2nd night of travel, somewhere in the deep forest between the Ashvin foothills and the Coldwater Basin, when something in the wind changed, and his wolf, ancient and instinct-driven in ways his human mind could not always translate, had simply turned. Theron, riding beside him, had noticed immediately. "That's not east," Theron said. "No," Leoric agreed. "Our next scheduled stop is the Marinpack settlement. They're expecting us by nightfall tomorrow. Send a message. We'll be delayed." Theron studied him for a moment with the particular expression he used when Leoric was doing something that made no strategic sense, and Theron was deciding whether to push back or trust the instinct. After 12 years as his beta, Theron had learned to read the difference between Leoric acting on poor judgment and Leoric acting on something deeper than judgment. He sent the message. They rode northwest. Leoric did not explain, partly because he couldn't, not in words that would satisfy Theron's organized mind, partly because he was still processing it himself. The pull, the wrongness in the air, the frequency that sat below hearing and above feeling, vibrating somewhere in the space between. Something was wrong in this direction. Something alive was in pain. He had felt it before, twice in his life. Both times it had led him to situations that needed intervention that no one else had recognized as necessary. The first time, he had been 19. The second time, 32. He was 38 now, and in the years between those two experiences, he had learned not to question the pull, but to follow it with his eyes open. They reached the ridge above Varenwood just before full dark. From the ridge, the pack settlement looked ordinary. Firelight in the hall windows. Smoke from cooking fires. The sounds of a community evening. Distant voices. Someone's dog barking at a shadow. And then, just for a moment, a sound that didn't belong. A human voice, in pain. Female. Coming from the open courtyard at the settlement's center. Theron heard it too. He went very still. "That's a punishment post," he said quietly, having recognized the acoustics, the way sound bounced off stone walls in a certain configuration. "Yes," Leoric said. "Pack law allows—" "I know what pack law allows." They sat in silence on the ridge, while the sounds from below continued. Leoric counted. His jaw was tight. Beside him, Theron had the expression of a man who was maintaining professional composure through significant effort. After the 7th sound, Leoric had started moving his horse forward. After the 8th, Theron put a hand on his arm. "Protocol says we don't intervene in internal pack discipline unless—" "Protocol says a great many things," Leoric said, with a quietness that Theron had learned to recognize as more dangerous than shouting. After the 9th sound, they were halfway down the ridge. And then, silence. Not the silence of it being over. Not the silence of resolution, or of someone walking away. A different silence entirely. The silence of a person who had made a decision inside themselves. A door closing. A light going out. The silence of someone choosing to stop giving the world the satisfaction of their sound. Leoric stopped moving. He had heard that silence once before. He never wanted to hear it again. And yet, here it was, reaching up from the valley below with cold fingers, and touching something in his chest he kept very carefully locked. "What is that?" Theron asked, very quietly. Leoric did not answer for a long moment. "That," he finally said, "is someone deciding whether to survive." He watched the courtyard from the ridge. Through the darkness and the distance, his wolf sight gave him shapes. The post, the bound figure, the retreating group of people walking back toward the warmth and light inside. Leaving her there, alone, in the cold, in the dark, still breathing, still present, but somewhere inside herself now, in a place they had pushed her to, deciding. Something moved in Leoric's chest that he did not have a clean name for. He had ruled 7 packs for 9 years. He had sat in council with alphas, who played long political games and called it governance. He had seen power exercised with wisdom, and power exercised with fear, and he had dedicated the whole of his adult life to building something better. A kingdom of packs that did not require its lowest members to bleed to keep its highest members comfortable. Varenwood, in his 9 years, had never flagged as a problem pack. Lucre sent his reports on time. His tribute was correct. His border maintenance was adequate. On paper, Varenwood was a functional, unremarkable mid-tier pack in the Eastern Territories. Leoric looked down at the girl tied to the post. Someone had made her unremarkable too. On paper, probably. "We're going down," Leoric said. "Tonight?" Theron asked. An unannounced visit in the middle of— "Not tonight," Leoric said. And there was something new in his voice now. Something deliberate and cold. "Tonight I want Lucre to think he is unobserved. Tonight I want to understand exactly what happens here when no one is watching." Theron understood immediately. Reconnaissance. Watch. Record. Don't be seen. And her? Leoric's gold eyes stayed fixed on the courtyard below, on the still figure, on the rise and fall of breathing that he could see even at this distance, because he was looking for it, because he needed to know she was still breathing. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "we ride into Varenwood as the Alpha King, making an unscheduled inspection tour. Full protocol. Full authority. And if Lucre if she is not alive and standing tomorrow morning," Leoric said, "Lucre will answer to me for it directly. And I will not be using protocol." Theron looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Slowly, below them the stars reflected off the stone courtyard of Varenwood, cold and bright. And the girl at the post tilted her head back slightly, as if counting them. Leoric stayed on the ridge until her breathing changed. Slower, deeper. And he understood she had found some form of sleep, or something close to it, and the cold would not kill her tonight. He did not fully understand why it mattered this much. Not yet. But his wolf did. His wolf had understood from the first moment it heard the silence. Chapter 5. The King Arrives. I woke to frost on my eyelashes. The night had settled into my bones the way cold always does when it has hours, and nothing stopping it, slowly, deeply, becoming part of the architecture of the body rather than just a surface sensation. My wrists, still bound to the post, had gone past pain into a dull, persistent numbness. My back was a different story. My back was a landscape of fire. I did not move immediately. I had learned in 6 years of small survivals that the first moments of waking were the most important ones for assessment. Before you moved, before you made a sound, you listened. You took inventory. You identified where you were and what surrounded you and what the rules of this particular morning were going to be. Courtyard, cold stone, alone, pre-dawn. The sky above the pack walls was the color of dark bruised plum, just beginning to lighten at the edges. The pack hall was quiet. The night guards had rotated an hour ago, based on the change in footstep patterns I could track, even half unconscious. The younger guard, the one who looked at his boots, was on the far gate. The eastern wall had no one. I was calculating whether I had the strength to work my wrists free from the post's binding. Old leather, softened by cold, possibly loose enough if I rotated my hands in a particular way Arya had taught me years ago, when I heard something that stopped every thought in my head. Horses. Not pack horses. Not the familiar sounds of Varenwood stables. I knew those rhythms as well as my own heartbeat. These were different. Multiple animals, moving at a steady, controlled pace up the main road toward the pack gates. Well-trained horses. Expensive horses. The kind of horses that belonged to people who held authority over everyone in this settlement, including Lucar. The night guard's voice, sharp with sudden alarm. "Halt! Identify!" A second voice, calm and utterly certain. "Theron, Beta of the Alpha King. Leoric of the 7 Packs. Stand aside." The courtyard seemed to hold its breath. I heard the gates open, and then I heard the footsteps. Several sets, disciplined and measured, coming through and into the pack ground. I heard the guards scrambling to wake the hall. I heard voices inside rising from sleep, slow to alarm. I heard Lucar's voice, stripped for once of its careful calm, clipped and sharp. "What time is it? Why didn't we receive notice? Who authorized—" "The Alpha King authorizes his own movements," said the steady voice. "Theron. He will speak with Alpha Lucar in the hall in 30 minutes. Please ensure it is ready." And then a different set of footsteps. Slower. Singular. A person who moved with the particular unhurried quality of someone who had never once in their life needed to hurry, because everything around them simply arranged itself according to their presence. Those footsteps stopped, right outside the courtyard entrance. I did not look. I kept my forehead against the post, and my eyes down, and my breathing carefully even. Every instinct in me said to stay still, stay invisible, be the unremarkable Omega, the woman-shaped absence in the corner of the room. Do not be seen, but I felt it. The way you feel a fire when you turn your back to it. The warmth of being looked at by something ancient and attentive, something that saw clearly in the dark. What is this? It was not a question. The boot-looking guard was stammering somewhere behind me. Punishment per Alpha Lucar's order. The charge was insubordination. How long has she been here? Since last evening, sir. Approximately... Silence. Then those slow footsteps crossed the courtyard stones and stopped behind me, and I felt the air change, warmer, different. And then a knife was cutting through the leather binding at my wrists with 2 clean strokes, and my arms fell forward, and the blood that rushed back into my hands was its own kind of agony that I swallowed whole without making a sound. I caught myself against the post before I fell. I would not fall in front of strangers. Slowly, carefully, using the post as support, I turned around. The man standing in front of me was tall in the way that mountains are tall, not imposing through effort, but simply through the fact of their own nature. Dark hair, close cropped. A face that was not soft and had not been for a long time, but was not cruel either. It was the face of someone who had learned to keep their reactions in a space slightly behind their eyes, where they could be examined before being expressed. And his eyes. Gold. Not amber, not hazel, gold, the color of deep autumn light through old glass. The color of something that had been burning quietly for a very long time. Those eyes were looking at me with an expression I couldn't immediately classify. I had expected assessment, the same calculating look I saw in Luker's eyes, or pity, the useless, wet-eyed pity of people who felt sad about suffering as long as it stayed far enough away not to require action. It was neither of those things. It was closer to recognition. Like a person who opens a door in an unfamiliar house and finds, inside, a room they have somehow always known the shape of. "Can you stand?" he asked. His voice was quiet, deep. "I'm standing," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected, given everything. Something shifted in his expression. Quick, subtle. Gone before I could fully read it. "What's your name?" "Thessaly." Behind him, the pack hall doors had opened, and Luker appeared at the top of the steps, dressed and composed in the approximately 4 minutes he had been given. I had to give him that. The man's ability to become the version of himself he wanted you to see was almost impressive. Smooth, controlled, radiating the polite authority of a pack alpha receiving a visit he had not expected, but was absolutely prepared for. "Alpha King?" Luker said, with a smooth inclination of his head. "We are honored. Forgive the informality of the hour. If we had received notice." "Thessaly," Lyric said without looking away from me. "Go inside. Find warmth." "She is an Omega assigned to," Luker began. "I am not speaking to you yet." Lyric's voice did not rise. It did not need to. It simply cut across Luker's words the way a blade cuts across a rope, clean, complete, no wasted motion. Luker fell silent. I looked at this king who had cut my bonds with his own knife in the pre-dawn dark of a courtyard he had no scheduled reason to be in, and I made a decision. I had spent 6 years making myself invisible. Perhaps it was time to be seen. "Thank you," I said quietly. And then I walked past him, up the steps, and into the warmth of the pack hall. Behind me, I heard Leoric finally turn toward Lucar. "Now," he said, "we'll talk." I didn't look back, but for the first time in 6 years, I walked through the doors of that hall not as an Omega, not as Silwen's invisible daughter, not as the small, quiet thing that survived by going unnoticed. I walked through as someone a king had spoken to directly, and Luker had been made to wait. The fire inside the hall cracked and hissed. Arya appeared from the direction of the kitchen, eyes wide, a blanket already in her hands, and she wrapped it around my shoulders without a word, and held on. "There's a king outside," she whispered. "I know," I said. "He cut you loose himself." "I know." She pulled back and looked at my face with those dark, perceptive eyes of hers that never missed anything. "Thessaly," she said carefully, "what is happening?" I looked back at the doors of the pack hall. Through the narrow gap where they hadn't fully closed, I could see Luker's profile and the set of his shoulders, rigid, tightly controlled, as he faced the Alpha King in the early morning light. For the first time in 6 years, Luker looked like a man who was not entirely certain of his own safety. It was, I realized, the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "I think," I said slowly, "that everything is about to change." Chapter 6, What the King Sees. Leoric had sat across from 43 alphas in 9 years of rule. He had learned to read them the way a skilled tracker reads ground, not from the obvious signs, but from the small disturbances, the places where things had been pressed down or turned over, the subtle geography of a territory that told you more than any report ever would. Luker was good. Leoric gave him that. He sat across the wide table in the pack hall's private meeting room, and he was precise and measured, and he met Leoric's eyes with the calibrated confidence of a man who believed he had every variable accounted for. His report was thorough. His numbers were accurate. He expressed appropriate surprise at the unscheduled visit and appropriate deference to the Alpha King's authority, all without an excess of either, which would have been the tell of a man performing submission, rather than actually deferring. Luker was performing nothing. He was too skilled for that. He was simply managing. And that was the tell. A man with nothing to hide does not manage an interaction. He has it. He responds. He allows things to unfold. Management, the constant slight adjustments, the fraction of a second calculations before each response, the way his eyes moved to the window once and then deliberately moved back. That was the behavior of a man who knew the shape of his own danger and was navigating around it. Leoric asked about resources, pack numbers, winter preparation, the border patrol schedule. Luker answered everything correctly. Leoric asked about the punishment post in the courtyard. Luker's management reached its most sophisticated level. Pack law allows for formal discipline procedures, he said with a tone that was exactly as apologetic as it needed to be, and not a shade more. The charge was insubordination, a formal complaint logged through proper channels. The severity was within the parameters permitted for the offense level. I'm aware of what pack law permits, Leoric said. I'm asking about this specific case. The female Omega, Thessaly. An Omega who questioned pack resource decisions in a way that undermined pack leadership authority, Luker said smoothly. Necessary to address firmly. Pack cohesion depends on. She was left outside overnight. A beat. The ruling included an overnight. In autumn temperatures, bound to a post, alone. Pack law allows. I know what pack law allows, Leoric said, and this time there was something underneath the quiet that made the room feel slightly smaller. I wrote the current revision of pack law. I'm not asking what it allows. I'm asking why you chose that. Luker met his eyes steadily. To demonstrate consequences. To whom? To the pack. She was alone in the courtyard. The pack was inside. Silence. Luker recalibrated. To her, then. What consequence were you demonstrating to her specifically? Another beat. Shorter this time. Luker was good at shortening the gaps, at not letting silences grow wide enough for things to fall into them. That questioning pack leadership has a cost. Leoric looked at him for a long moment. Does she do it often? He said. Question pack leadership. Often enough to require correction. How many times has she been brought before a pack assembly? Twice in 6 years. For what? The first time. The first tiny fracture appeared in Luker's composure. Tiny. If Leoric hadn't been watching for exactly this, the place where the management developed a hairline crack, he would have missed it. A minor incident, Luker said, resolved without formal discipline. He was lying. Not about the resolution, probably true that it hadn't reached formal discipline. He was lying about the minor. I'll want to review your pack records, Leoric said. Full council logs for the past 7 years. Punishment records, assembly records, resource allocation records. This time the pause was fractionally longer. Of course, Luker said. I'll have them prepared. Today, Leoric said. By this evening. By midday. The two men looked at each other across the table, and in the space between them, invisible, weightless, absolute, was the full understanding of what this conversation actually was. Not a friendly inspection. Not an administrative visit. An assessment. And both of them knew it. Is there anything else the Alpha King requires? Luker asked. Yes, Leoric said. Thessaly will be assigned to assist my staff during our stay. We'll need meals prepared, quarters maintained, standard visitor protocol. Luker's eyes moved to the window again. Back. She is assigned to pack duties that reassign her. Yes, Alpha King. Leoric stood. The meeting was over. He had what he needed from Luker's management, from the precise geography of what the man had avoided and what he had pressed toward, and the single hairline crack in the place he hadn't expected to be questioned. He would send Theron to start on the records. He needed to speak to the girl. He found her in the kitchen. She was standing at the fire, warming her hands, with a dark-haired woman beside her, who was watching the door with an alertness that told Leoric immediately. This was someone who had been watching doors for a long time. The loyal friend. He had expected one, people like Thessaly. Survivors in hostile environments almost always had one carefully chosen ally. Thessaly turned when he entered. In the full light of the kitchen fire, he could see her clearly for the first time. She was slight, smaller than he had realized in the courtyard dark, but the way she held herself denied the smallness. There was something in her posture, even now, with the evidence of the night still visible in the careful way she kept her back from touching anything, that was not defeated. Not even close. Her eyes were gray, the particular gray of river water in winter, still and clear and deep, with something moving underneath. Lucar has been asked to reassign you to my staff for the duration of our visit, Leoric said. You'll be excused from pack duties. She looked at him steadily. For how long? As long as necessary. Necessary for what? The dark-haired friend made a small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Leoric noted it. I'd like to speak with you, he said. About Varenwood. About your experience here. About your mother. The steadiness in Thessaly's gray eyes deepened into something more guarded. But not afraid. Careful. The difference was significant. You know about my mother, she said. I know she was the pack healer. I know she died 6 years ago. He paused. I know her death was recorded as fever. Something moved across Thessaly's face. Fast and sharp. You know something about her death, Thessaly said. It was not a question. I know that in the past 9 years, 4 pack healers in the Eastern Territories have died of fever, within 6 months of being newly appointed alphas, taking leadership, Leoric said. It is a pattern I began tracking 3 years ago. Varenwood is one of those packs. The kitchen was very quiet. The fire crackled. Thessaly and Arya exchanged a look that carried a full conversation in 2 seconds. Then Thessaly looked back at him, and the guardedness in her expression shifted into something cleaner. I have something to show you, she said. Something my mother left. Leoric waited. She reached into the neckline of her dress and withdrew a folded piece of paper. Old, soft-edged, handled many times. She unfolded it with hands that were completely steady and laid it on the kitchen table between them. He looked at the list of names, the dates, the words beside each one. He recognized 3 of the names immediately. His jaw tightened. You decoded this, he said. My mother taught me the cipher when I was a child, Thessaly said. She told me it was a game. Leoric looked at the paper. Then he looked at her. She was protecting you, he said. She was making sure you had the tools to survive what she knew was coming. Thessaly's chin lifted by 1 degree. Her gray eyes were very bright. I know, she said. I've known for a long time. Outside, the autumn wind moved through Varenwood's trees. Inside, in the kitchen warmth, the alpha king of the 7 packs looked at the daughter of a dead healer and understood, with a clarity that arrived like cold water, that the pattern he had been tracking for 3 years had a witness who had been living in the middle of it, a witness who had survived it, and who had kept her mother's evidence folded against her skin, next to her heart, waiting for someone she could trust to show it to. Chapter 7. The Records and the Ruin. Theron found the first anomaly at 11 in the morning. He had been working through Varenwood's council logs in the small records room off the main hall, a space that smelled of old paper and tallow candles, and the specific dusty weight of things that had been kept and not examined for too long. Lucar had provided the records with precise punctuality. They were stacked on the table when Theron arrived, correctly organized, correctly labeled, which was itself a detail worth noting. A pack that kept records this well had a reason to be confident in what the records showed, or a reason to be confident in what they didn't show. Theron had been beta for 12 years. He had reviewed hundreds of pack records across 7 territories. He knew what normal administrative gaps looked like. The irregular meeting, the month with thin documentation, the year when a scribe changed and the formatting shifted. Normal disorder had a texture to it. It was varied and organic and slightly different every time. Varenwood's records were too clean. Not in the way of careful record keeping, in the way of careful record editing. The gaps were too consistent. Every 3rd month, across 7 years, there was a council meeting logged with attendance but no minutes. Not rare. Packs sometimes had verbal-only sessions for sensitive matters. But 7 years of them, every 3rd month, with the same 3 names listed as attendees and no others? That was a pattern. Theron went to find Leoric. He found him in the kitchen, which was unexpected, sitting across a table from the Omega girl and her friend, with what appeared to be a piece of old paper between them, and an expression on Leoric's face that Theron had not seen in a long time. Leoric's default expression when working was what Theron privately called the controlled surface, professionally neutral, attentive, giving nothing away. He had spent 12 years learning to read what lived beneath the controlled surface. Right now, beneath it, was something Theron had seen perhaps 4 times in their association. Something that lived between fury and focus. The particular state Leoric entered when something had violated his understanding of what was acceptable, and he was in the process of deciding what to do about it. "The records," Theron said, and then glanced at the 2 women. "Speak," Leoric said. Theron laid out what he had found. The patterns, the missing minutes, the 3 consistent names. Thessaly's hand moved forward slightly on the table. Which 3 names? Theron looked at Leoric, who nodded once. Lucar. His second-in-command, a man named Faro. And the Pack Council elder, recorded as... He checked his notes. Draven. Thessaly made a sound. Low, sharp, like something had clicked into place. Draven died 4 years ago, she said. They said he fell. Off the Eastern Watchtower. Her voice was very controlled. He was the one who trained my mother. The kitchen was quiet. What was discussed in those meetings? Arya asked. Nothing, officially, Theron said. That's the point. They're logged as occurring. No content recorded. Leoric looked at Thessaly. You said your mother kept a journal? She wore it around her neck. When they buried her, it was gone. Lucar has it, Leoric said. It wasn't a question. He must, Thessaly said. Or Maldra. Arya shifted in her seat. Very slightly. Just enough for Thessaly to catch. Thessaly looked at her. What? Arya hesitated for one moment. Then, 3 months ago, I was doing laundry in the lower hall. I saw Maldra go into the storage rooms, the locked ones, below the hall. The ones that are supposed to be for winter provisions only. She paused. She was carrying something under her arm, wrapped in cloth. About this size? She held up her hands, indicating the dimensions of a small book. Silence. You didn't tell me, Thessaly said quietly. I didn't know what it meant, Arya said. I didn't want to say something that would make you do something that would get you. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I was trying to protect you. Thessaly reached over and touched her hand once, brief. Then she looked at Leoric. The locked storage rooms have 1 key. Lucar has it on his person. There's a 2nd key that was made for the old Packmaster 20 years ago. I don't know where it is. I do, said a voice from the kitchen doorway. Everyone turned. Orvin stood in the doorway, 81 years old, small and bent as a winter tree, with eyes that were very sharp and very calm. He had a clay cup of something in one hand. He looked at the assembled group with the expression of a man who had been waiting for this specific conversation for a very long time. Sit down, old man, Leoric said, with a gentleness in his voice that surprised Theron. And tell me what you know. Orvin settled into the chair at the end of the table, as if it had been prepared for him. I know a great deal, he said. I have been waiting for someone with the authority to act on it. His eyes moved to Thessaly. And someone with the evidence to support it. He reached into his coat. The 2nd key to the storage rooms has been in my cottage for 18 years. Silwyn gave it to me for safekeeping. He placed it on the table. Thessaly stared at the key. She planned this, Thessaly said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. She planned for someone to eventually find it, all of it. The cipher, the note, the key. Your mother was the most methodical person I have ever known, Orvin said. She did not do anything without purpose. She knew she was in danger for at least a year before she died. She spent that year making sure that if something happened to her, the truth could eventually be found. Thessaly's gray eyes were very bright. She was not going to cry. Theron could see that from across the table, the absolute refusal of it. But the brightness was there. She was protecting me, Thessaly said. She was protecting everyone, Orvin said. But yes, especially you. Leoric picked up the key from the table. Tonight, he said. When Lucar's at the evening assembly, I want 2 of my people in those storage rooms. He looked at Theron, quietly. Theron nodded. And tomorrow morning, Leoric continued, I want a full council convened. Every pack member, official authority. Lucar, who had been in his office all morning, under the impression that the Alpha King was simply conducting a routine review, had no idea that in the warm kitchen of his own pack hall, the architecture of his careful 7-year construction was beginning to come apart. He would find out tomorrow. But tonight, Thessaly held the key her mother had left for her, and something in her face that had been locked for 6 years quietly began to open. Chapter 8. The Locked Room. We went in at midnight. Not me. Leoric had been clear about that, and I had been equally clear that I was going, and we had reached a compromise that I was privately certain only worked because Theron had given Leoric a look that said this argument will take longer than just letting her come. Theron, Aria, me, and 2 of Leoric's guards, silent and capable, moving through the lower hall of the pack building in the deep dark of midnight when Lucar and Maldra were asleep and the night watch was on the outer perimeter. The key fit perfectly. The door swung open without a sound. Well-maintained hinges, of course. Lucar maintained everything. The storage room was cold and smelled of earth and old stone. Theron's small lamp threw a circle of yellow light that pushed back the dark just enough to see the shapes around us. Shelves of provisions, yes, properly stocked, correctly organized. And at the far end, behind a row of sealed clay pots, a wooden chest, locked with a different lock than the room. Aria and I looked at each other. Theron pulled a small leather roll from his coat, tools, and bent over the chest's lock with the focused calm of a man who had done this before. I stood very still. The cold of the room was nothing after last night. I barely felt it. I was listening, to the building above us, to the footsteps that weren't there, to the silence that said we were still undiscovered. And I was thinking about my mother. She had been in this building every day. She had walked these halls. She had known what was hidden here, and she had held that knowledge, and she had made choices, hard, careful, long-sighted choices, to make sure it could someday be found. I love you, Mama, I thought. I understand now. Everything you did. I understand. The lock gave. Theron opened the chest. Inside, documents. Many of them. Scrolled and folded and stacked with Lucar's characteristic precision, because even his hidden evidence he kept organized. And there, on top, wrapped in the same oilcloth my mother used for her medical documents to protect them from damp, was the journal. I picked it up. The leather was exactly as I remembered. Soft, worn along the spine from years of daily handling. The brass clasp was slightly tarnished now. I pressed it against my chest for 1 second with my eyes closed, and Aria put her hand on my shoulder and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. Then I opened it. My mother's handwriting. Page after page of it. Medical notes, pack records, observations, in the coded shorthand. Years of it. And woven through it in a different ink, a different urgency, the record she had been keeping in secret. Names, dates, transactions, pack resources redirected, tribute records falsified, money moving from pack funds to accounts Lucar controlled privately. Not a little. Years of it. Systematic, careful, significant. And more than the money. A record of 6 people. Their names, their roles, what they had known or discovered or threatened to reveal, and the dates they died, and the manner, fever, accident, disappeared while on border patrol, ruled a wolf attack. And at the back of the journal, in my mother's handwriting, a single page that was different from the rest. Not code, plain language. If you are reading this, then you were brave enough to find it. I am sorry I could not be there. I am sorry I couldn't tell you everything while I could still hold you. Thessaly, if it is you, Know that I left this world fighting. And know what I know, what I have always known since the moment I held you for the first time. You are not what they made you. You are not the name they gave you. You are not small. You were never small. The truth is in your blood. It is in mine. And someday, when the right person is there to hear it, tell them who you really are. I read the last line twice, and then I looked up at Theron, who was watching me with that carefully professional expression of his that he used when something was affecting him, and he was deciding whether to acknowledge it. Tell me, I said. What does it mean? Tell them who you really are. Theron looked at me, and then he said something that changed every single thing. Leoric needs to see this tonight, he said. All of it. Right now. Why? Arya said. Theron's expression did something complicated. Because 18 years ago, he said slowly, the Alpha King's family, his bloodline, the ruling line of the Seven Packs, had a healer. A healer who served the royal pack. He paused. Her name was Silwen. The cold room was very quiet. She left the royal pack, Theron continued. There was a situation. A political situation that put her in danger. She was helped to disappear, given a new placement in a distant pack. He looked at me. His eyes were very steady. She was already pregnant when she left. The lamplight flickered. I heard Arya's sharp intake of breath beside me. I didn't move. I couldn't. What are you saying? I said. My voice was someone else's. Theron looked at the journal in my hands, at my mother's letter, at the last line. Tell them who you really are. Your mother's name before she came to Varenwood, Theron said quietly, was Silwen of the royal house. She was bonded to... He stopped, clearly working through the enormity of the next words. She was bonded to the Alpha King's elder brother, who died before Leoric took the throne. The silence stretched out between us like ice over deep water. Which means, I said, and I could hear my own voice from a great distance, that you are blood of the royal line, Theron said. You are, by lineage, of the highest rank in the Seven Packs. I looked at my hands, the hands of a woman who had spent 6 years scrubbing floors, whose wrists had been tied to a punishment post 12 hours ago, whose back was still burning. Behind us, Arya made a sound that wasn't a word. Leoric, I said finally. He knows? Theron shook his head. He doesn't know you exist. Your mother's disappearance was kept secret. Even from him. He paused. But now I think the reason he came here, the reason the instinct pulled him in this direction. He stopped, looked at me. Blood recognizes blood, he said softly, even when the mind doesn't know what it's recognizing yet. I closed the journal. I held it against my chest, and I thought of a king on a ridge in the dark, cutting a girl's bonds with his own knife before he even knew her name. I thought of gold eyes. I walked out of the storage room, up through the cold hall, up the stairs, and knocked on the door of the room where the Alpha King was working by lamplight. The door opened. Leoric looked at me, at the journal, at my face. There's something you need to know, I said. Chapter 9, The Reckoning. The morning of the full council assembly came in cold and white. Frost covered the ground of Varenwood's courtyard, the same courtyard where I had knelt 2 nights ago, where the reckoning stake still stood at the center. I looked at it from the hall window as the pack began to assemble outside. It looked smaller in the daylight, less permanent. Everything that was supposed to be permanent had a way of looking smaller when the truth arrived. I had not slept. After I had shown Leoric the journal, we had talked for 3 hours. Him asking questions with focused precision, me answering with everything I had, the note I had found in the storage room floor, the names, the dates, the years of small observations that had seemed like nothing individually and were everything collectively. Theron present, making notes. Arya, who I had refused to leave outside the door, sitting against the wall with her knees pulled up, listening. And then the part about my mother, my lineage, the thing that had upended the architecture of my own identity in the space of a single sentence. Leoric had gone very still when Theron told him, not the managed stillness of a politician, the real stillness of someone receiving information that rearranges things they had believed for a long time. He had looked at me for a long moment after Theron finished. "She never told you," he said. "No. She was protecting you." Not a question. His voice was very quiet. "From what I understand," I said carefully, "a girl who was known as royal blood in a pack like Varenwood, under an alpha like Lucre, she would have been leverage, or a threat. Either way, she would not have been safe." "No," Leoric agreed. Something moved behind his gold eyes. "She would not have been." We had sat in silence for a moment. "You are owed an apology," he said then, "from the royal line, for not knowing, for not protecting you." I looked at him. "You didn't know I existed." "No, but my family, my brother's bond, your mother's situation, those were failures of protection, regardless of intent." I didn't know what to do with that. With a man who held authority over 7 territories sitting across a kitchen table and acknowledging a debt without being asked to. I had never in my life had someone with power over me acknowledge owing me anything. I had sat with that strange new feeling until the window lightened into dawn. And now it was morning, and the courtyard below me was filling with every member of Varenwood Pack, from the senior warriors down to the youngest children, from the kitchen staff to the border guards, all of them summoned to a mandatory full council assembly by the authority of the Alpha King. Lucre was already in position at the front of the assembled pack when I came out. He had dressed formally, his best coat, the pack crest prominent. He had understood by now that this was not a routine administrative review. His face showed none of that understanding, but his body had the particular set of a man bracing for impact. Maldra stood beside him. Her eyes found me the moment I appeared at the hall doors. And for the first time in 6 years, the soft blade smile was not there. In its place was something raw that she was trying to cover and failing. Fear. Good. Leoric stood at the center of the courtyard. He had the stillness of the ridge, that deep, particular steadiness that was not absence, but presence, compressed. Theron flanked him. His 2 guards stood at the gates. Everything was positioned exactly as it needed to be. The entire pack was watching. Leoric began. He spoke without preamble, without the political softening that powerful people so often use to make hard truths go down easier. He spoke simply and directly, the way a man speaks when he believes the people in front of him deserve to understand exactly what has happened to them. Varenwood's pack funds, redirected over 7 years, estimated at 30% of total pack resources. Provisions that should have fed every pack member, including the Omegas whose rations had been cut 3 times in the past year, funneled into Lucre's private holdings. He read the names from my mother's list. 6 people. Their roles. What they had known. The manner of their deaths. He read the dates. The patterns. He placed my mother's journal, opened to the relevant pages, on the reckoning stake. On the reckoning stake. I heard the crowd's breathing change, felt the atmosphere of the courtyard shift from tense anticipation to something heavier, something that had been compressed for 7 years and was expanding. Lucre spoke. "These are falsified documents. This woman has a personal grievance against my leadership. She has conspired with. These documents have been authenticated by my beta and cross-referenced with Royal Pack records that predate your leadership by 20 years, Leoric said. The handwriting has been verified against pack healer records from 3 different territories. Silwyn of Varenwood is corroborated on 12 independent points. He paused. Try again. Lucre's management cracked. Not entirely. The man had too much iron in him for total collapse, but the crack was visible now. In the set of his jaw. In the single moment where his eyes moved to the gates and then back, calculating and finding no calculation that worked. Lucre of Varenwood, Leoric said. By the authority of the Alpha King of the 7 Packs, under the law of the Royal Charter, you are hereby removed from leadership. You will answer to the Royal Council for the charges of resource theft, obstruction of justice, and the deaths of 6 pack members. Silence. Complete silence. Then Maldra moved. She was fast. I had not expected it. She pulled something from under her coat and lunged toward Leoric with the specific desperation of someone who had decided that if it was ending anyway, It would end on their terms. I moved faster. I don't know entirely what happened in the next 2 seconds. I know I was not thinking. I know that something that had been compressed in me for 6 years, or 22 years, or my whole life, uncoiled in a single instant and moved my body before my mind caught up. I caught Maldra's wrist, twisted. The thing she was holding, a short blade, clattered onto the courtyard stones. And then Leoric's guards were there, and Maldra was restrained, and the courtyard erupted into sound. In the chaos, I stood in the center of the courtyard, at the reckoning stake, my mother's journal open on it. I looked at the pack around me, people who had watched me be invisible for 6 years, people who had looked away when I knelt here 2 nights ago, people who were now looking at me with expressions I had never seen on their faces before, seeing me, actually seeing me. Orvin was at the edge of the crowd. He met my eyes and inclined his head once, with a dignity that was its own kind of ceremony. I felt a presence beside me, Leoric. He had moved to my side during the chaos without my noticing, and he was standing close enough that I could feel the warmth of him against the cold morning air. "Are you injured?" he said quietly. "No," I said. "That was—" He stopped. "Stupid?" I offered. "I was going to say unexpected." A pause. And effective. I looked at him sideways. I spent 6 years learning to move quietly in this courtyard. I know every stone. He was quiet for a moment. "Thessaly," he said. And there was something in the way he said my name. Not the Alpha King's voice, not the formal authority, something underneath. "I heard your silence 2 nights ago, from the ridge. I heard it, and I didn't. I should have come down immediately. I should not have waited." "You couldn't have known." "I heard," he said. "I knew something was wrong. I waited for protocol, and for strategy, and— You came," I said. "That morning. You came." He looked at me, and in the middle of the cold courtyard, with Lucre being escorted to the gates by royal guards, and the pack of Varenwood finding its voice for the first time in 7 years, all around us, Leoric, the Alpha King of the 7 packs, the man who had never needed to hurry because the world arranged itself around his presence, looked at the daughter of Silwyn, and something in his gold eyes went unguarded for one clear, unhidden moment. "Yes," he said quietly. "I came." And somehow, that was everything. Chapter 10. After the Silence. Spring came late to Varenwood that year. It always did, in the shadow of the Ashvin foothills. The cold held on stubbornly, keeping the ground hard and the trees bare well into what the calendar insisted was warming season. But when it came completely, the way things do when they have been held back too long. All at once, and golden. I was standing at the window of the pack healer's cottage when the first true warmth hit. The cottage had been empty for 6 years. It still smelled like Silwyn, herbs and beeswax, and the particular clean scent of someone who spent their life in service to other people's healing. I had spent the first week after Lucre's removal simply sitting in it, not doing anything, just breathing the air. Arya had sat with me on the better days. On the harder days, she had left food on the step and checked on me twice a day and asked no questions. She was the best person I had ever known. The royal investigation had taken 3 months. Theron had overseen it with his characteristic precision. Every record reviewed, every account traced, every testimony taken. 6 families had been officially notified that their loved ones had not died by accident or illness. There had been a ceremony in the courtyard. I had stood at the front of it because someone had to, and because my mother's name was on that list, and because standing in the courtyard without shaking felt like the thing she would have wanted me to do. I had not shaken. Lucar was in royal custody, awaiting formal trial. Maldra also. The pack had chosen new interim leadership from among its senior members, people who had been too afraid to speak for 7 years, and were now speaking with the slightly dazed energy of those who have been freed from something they had stopped believing they were trapped in. Varenwood was learning to be different. Slowly, unevenly, with setbacks and confusion and the occasional resurgence of old habits. But learning. I was learning too. The question of my lineage had taken longer to settle than the investigation. There were legalities, Old ones, complex ones. The kind that required Leoric's council of 7 elders, and several very long days of formal deliberation. I had stayed at the edge of all of it, because I understood that this particular truth needed to be handled by people who understood the architecture of power in ways I was still learning. But Leoric had kept me informed. Every session, every development. He came to the healer's cottage in the evenings, not always, but often enough that Arya had started leaving a second cup out on the step on the nights she thought he might come, which I had only discovered accidentally, and about which I had said nothing. We talked. About my mother. About his brother, who he described with a careful, measured love that told me the grief was old and well carried, but still present. About the 7 packs and the responsibilities of the throne, and the particular loneliness of a role that required you to be certain at all times, publicly, even on the days when you weren't. I told him about learning to be invisible, about the 6 years of small survivals, about the geometry of existing in a space that wanted you smaller. He listened the way very few people listen, completely, without planning his response, without waiting for the pause where he could redirect. He listened the way Silwen had listened, and the recognition of that moved through me like warmth. The formal recognition came on the morning of the first true spring day. Leoric had asked me, the evening before, whether I wanted a ceremony. The Royal Council's recommendation was a formal acknowledgement before the pack and the records of the 7 packs, official recognition of my bloodline, my standing, my name. What would my name be? I had asked. Thessaly of the Royal House, he said. Daughter of Silwen, blood of the ruling line. I had thought about it for a moment. It would mean people know who I am, I said. Yes. It would mean I could never go back to being invisible. No, he agreed. You could not. I had looked at him across the cottage table, in the lamplight, at the gold eyes that had found me in the dark, at the man who had heard the silence and come down from the ridge. Good, I said. I don't want to be invisible anymore. So, that morning, standing in the courtyard of Varenwood, with the spring light coming in gold over the pack walls, and the entire pack assembled, and Arya beside me in the good blue dress she'd been saving for something important. I stood at the center of the space where I had once been on my knees, where my mother's journal had rested on the reckoning stake, and I listened to my name spoken aloud in its full truth for the first time in my life. Leoric stood across from me, formal, correct. The Alpha King of the 7 packs in the full weight of his authority. And then, after the formal words, after Theron had read the Council's official document, after the record had been amended and witnessed, he did something that was not in any protocol. He reached out and took my hand. Not as a gesture of authority, not as a political statement, though it would be interpreted as one. He would have known that, calculated it, decided it was what he meant. As a person. Holding another person's hand in the spring light. I looked up at him. You were never what they made you, he said quietly. The words landed with the weight of recognition. My mother's words, from the letter, spoken now by someone who had not read them, who had arrived at the same truth by a different road. My throat tightened. I know, I said. I know you know, he said. I'm saying it anyway. Arya, to my right, made a sound that was definitely crying, dressed up as a cough, and I would tease her about it for years afterward. The spring warmth moved through the courtyard. Behind us, the pack of Varenwood, people who had been made afraid for 7 years, who were finding their way back to themselves, began to make sounds that I had not heard in this space before. Sounds of relief, of recognition, of something that had been locked open. I thought of my mother on that ridge above another courtyard, in another time, making the slow and careful choices of a woman who knew she was running out of time but believed, absolutely, that the truth had a longer life than fear. She was right. She had always been right. And I, the small invisible Omega who had spent 6 years learning to move quietly through a space that wanted her smaller, I was standing in the center of it, in full light, in full name. The reckoning stake was still there. Someone would remove it, eventually. But that morning it stood as it always had, and the spring light hit it, and for one moment I looked at it and thought, I knelt there. and I got back up, and I will never kneel there again. Leoric's hand was warm around mine. What happens now? I asked him. He considered. In the way he considered everything, fully, without rushing. Now, he said, you decide. You have standing, resources, the protection of the crown. You have your mother's knowledge and the record of everything that was done here. You can do whatever you choose with it. What would you choose? I asked. If you were me. He was quiet for a moment. I would stay, he said. I would learn what I needed to learn. I would help rebuild what was broken here. And I would make sure that what happened to Silwen, to all 6 of them, never happened in any pack again. I looked at him. And then? I said. And then, he said, and there was something in his voice that was not the Alpha King, was not protocol, was simply Leoric. I would want to see what happens next. Arya had stopped pretending not to cry. I squeezed the hand of the king who had heard my silence from a ridge in the dark and come down before morning. All right, I said. Let's see what happens next. The spring light moved across Varenwood like a hand being passed over something that had been cold for too long. And I, Thessaly, daughter of Silwen, blood of the royal line, the woman they thought they had broken. I lifted my face to it. Warm, unhidden, whole. The end.